Welcome to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. Let's get right into it. On the phone with me is Charlene Foss-Eggemann. She is a Republican State Central Committeeman, or a former Republican State Central Committeeman. She also was the chairman of Maine Township. She's been involved in Illinois politics for at least a decade, and she's been at the head of leadership as well in Republican politics. So when Char told me about this potential election fraud, shocker in Cook County of all places, we're not shocked, and what was going on in the Frank DeFranco race when he ran for Cook County judge, I was flabbergasted. And so Char, fortunately, has written about what happened in this case. She joins me on the phone right now. Welcome to the program, Char.
Hi, Jeannie. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm just going to start. You wrote this, and it was published in the Illinois GOP chairman's weekly report. He ran this article, and I'm surprised that it has not gotten further attention. I'm surprised that the mainstream media, I shouldn't be surprised, but I am a little bit surprised that the mainstream media did not pick up this alarming case of, I don't know, election irregularities, abnormalities. I think potential fraud is here, but what you wrote is shocking. I'm just going to read the start of it. She says, we've had a lot to talk about lately about election integrity in different places. Caveat here, of course, the Arizona election was largely about election fraud, and that primary just took place yesterday. Blake Masters, he won that Senate primary on the Republican side. It looks like Carrie Lake is possibly going to win her quest for the governorship and be the Republican nominee. And both of them were adamant about the 2020 election fraud that they saw happen in Arizona. So this is not something new. But in Illinois, we like to just pretend like that never happens, even though historically we have numerous examples. And I'm going to go through a couple of those in a moment. But back to your story. You basically say Chicago is still best known for voter fraud, and it is. Hans von Spakovsky of Heritage wrote extensively about the election fraud in 1982, where literally 100,000 votes were stolen, 65 people were indicted, and all but two of them were convicted of election fraud. One of them wasn't convicted because they found he was not capable of standing trial for insanity reasons, and the other one wasn't elected because they died. Wasn't convicted because they died. So election fraud. 1982, there's the notorious example of possibly election fraud in the presidential election in 1960 that permeated from Chicago. And so we know, look, everybody knows and understands how this happens. And then we come to 2020, and it seems like we've got the same sort of playbook. Where these voters come from, who are they, and what's going on. So back to your article, because this is so good, so well written. Cook County avoids transparency like a vampire avoids the sun, and the courts provide cover from the light. The case of Frank DeFranco is illustrative of this dark history. Mr. DeFranco, a successful suburban attorney, ran for Cook County judge as a Republican in the November 3rd, 2020 general election. Mr. DeFranco led his opponent, Democrat Patricia Fallon, by 10,439 votes on election night. However, Cook County, and the state of Illinois, by the way, continues to count any vote-by-mail ballots received for an additional 2 weeks before certifying the election. That's right, we're unique. Illinois allows you 14 more days to receive vote-by-mail ballots before certifying the election. It's an extraordinary long period of time. It is fraught with pitfalls if you really want to count the votes in a timely manner. But anyway, going on. Mr. DeFranco's lead, again, 10,439 votes on election night, began to slowly dwindle as the vote-by-mail ballots trickled in. On November 14th, at 5 p.m., the Cook County Clerk's website showed that Mr. DeFranco had prevailed by 485 votes, but it wasn't over. From November 21st, okay, so you put in here November 14th, Char. Now, 14 days post-election would have been November 17th, with the final count having to have been done by November 17th. Regardless, November 14th, he's up 485 votes. Then from November 21st through December 1st, after the vote by mail ballot counting deadline had passed, it actually passed on November 17th, and after the clerk sent everyone home because there were no more ballots to count, she should have stopped counting on November 17th. Let's be clear here. November 17th, yes. She should have stopped counting. The clerk's office magically added another 5,660 ballots to Fallon's total, declaring Fallon the surprise winner by 502 votes. The shocking part was that although the clerk disclosed that there were only a possible 43,139 vote-by-mail ballots that were outstanding, because let's face it, people do request a vote-by-mail ballot, and then they just fail to turn it in. That happens all the time. So there were some outstanding. The clerk, though, ended up counting an additional 18,423 unexplained vote-by-mail ballots for a total of 61,562. Here's what's important, folks. Every day, as they are going through early voting, as they are going through vote-by-mail chasing and recording it, every day, the clerks are recording so-and-so, like John Smith, requested a vote-by-mail ballot on, whatever day, say October 25th. And then John Smith, the ballot was mailed on X day and it was returned on November 3rd or whatever it is. They track every single day who early voted, who requested a vote by mail ballot, and when that vote by mail ballot was returned, if it was returned, and how it was returned. That is recorded every single day. So they knew that they only had 43,139 vote by mail ballots that were outstanding the day of the election. Okay. And they ended up finding an additional 18,423 wrong. Something happened here. Okay, Char, back to you. Like, what the hell's going on?
Well, we don't know. The first time I heard of discrepancies like this was from Chris Cleveland, who is the former chairman of the Chicago GOP. And he put out years ago to the Chicago Election Authority, why is it that there were a certain number of people that voted, yet there were a greater number of votes cast? And, we've never had any authority shore up those numbers, whether it was Chicago, whether it was in Cook County. Mm-hmm. We have an entire bureaucracy dedicated to, being competent in adding up these numbers, making them make sense. But, people are just like, yeah, good enough. And standard comes to explaining these problems with the election is, well, if the errors aren't big enough to change the outcome, we're going to look the other way. And I think the problem is with anyone like Mr. DeFranco, who points out just obvious questions that voters deserve an answer to from their government. We're called, tinfoil hat wearers. How dare you ask a question? You're trying to shake confidence in the public in their elections. You're misleading them. That's not a good thing. That's not a healthy thing for democracy to ask questions. Just assume it's okay and don't cast a shadow on the legitimacy of our elections. That's not the point. I think that it's not a partisan issue. Everybody should be concerned when we can't explain discrepancies like this, because every vote is precious. We have to remember all of our forebears, everyone who has fought for our right to vote. It's a privilege, and there are people all around the world that would love to have an equal say in their government. And casting that vote on election day is what makes everybody's voice equal. It's the great equalizer. Not a single person in D.C., in Springfield, has a greater say on election day than the most modest person in rural Illinois. And if we can't explain these discrepancies, we have a problem. So I just think we deserve to know, why is it that these numbers don't add up?
And why would they not want to get to the bottom of it either? Why can they not explain it? We have the same problem in DuPage County where 1,600 more ballots were cast than the clerk can give a name to a voter who voted, and they won't explain it.
Nothing to see here, Jeannie. We're government workers. We're going to get our pension. No one's going to be accountable. The numbers are good enough.
Well, let's go on.
Go away.
Okay, so you continued on because Mr. DeFranco has not given up, by the way. He's not given up. He's still in court about this. The lawsuits continue. So Mr. DeFranco smelled a rat, you write. He filed suit against the clerk of the Cook County Circuit Court. The court reluctantly granted Mr. DeFranco, that is really sad, reluctantly, but he reluctantly granted Mr. DeFranco a partial discovery recount of vote-by-mail ballots in 20% of the judicial district precincts. The goal of a recount is to establish the number of valid votes for each candidate and then extrapolate from the sample count whether the level of voting irregularities would have changed the election. Vote-by-mail ballots are recounted by evaluating the accepted vote-by-mail ballot envelopes. Since vote-by-mail ballots are removed and made indistinguishable from other counted ballots, you have to look at the envelope, which is basically your verification that it was a valid voter and a valid vote. It is important in a discovery recount to not only count the number of envelopes, but also to evaluate the outside contents of each envelope. This is because the ballot inside a vote-by-mail envelope should only be added to the counted ballots if the envelope properly contains the voter's signature, address, and the signature of a witness. It gets better. For reasons still unknown, the clerk failed to provide all the accepted vote-by-mail envelopes from the sample precincts. So she's only sampling 20%. Let's say, for example, she's got in those 20% of the precincts that she sampled, maybe there's 100 precincts she sampled. I'm just making this up. And in those 100 precincts, she knows from her data that she's collected that she should have 100,000 vote-by-mail ballots. And if she can't come up with 100,000 vote-by-mail envelopes, then what happened to the envelopes? Because every piece of election information must be kept by federal law for 22 months. Every single one of those envelopes should have been inspected, but that's not what happened. Mr. DeFranco's volunteers watched closely and tabulated 3,298 fewer vote-by-ballot envelopes than the total number of vote-by-mail votes tabulated in the discovery precincts. Mr. DeFranco filed a motion for summary judgment based on the massive discrepancy after the farcical recount. In a stunning move, the county clerk responded by filing its own motion for summary judgment. The clerk had suddenly found electronic images of all but 455 vote-by-mail envelopes, even those envelopes not produced in the discovery recount. So let's pause there. Were you involved in this recount effort? Did you get to see any of the machinations while that was happening up to this point?
Yeah, I wasn't. I talked to a few people who were, and I've been involved, in at least 2 recounts personally. And the way they go is you have a table with workers and they have rubber banded bundles, and you take the rubber band off and you're holding the bundle and you're flipping them quickly, and you're just counting. And counting the number of ballot envelopes is fine, but the thing that we need to audit is which of those votes were valid. So which of those envelopes should have been in that counted bundle. If they're not filled out properly on the outside of the envelope, then they shouldn't represent a counted vote in the bundle. The other problem with this recount was the on-site on the day of the physical recount of 20% of the precincts, the clerk only brought forth for recounting the readily available vote-by-mail envelopes. So right from the get-go, not all of them were there. Some of them were just
what do you mean readily available? They should be all stored under lock and key in the same place.
They didn't state, like, we're missing this many, or we'll schedule an additional day once the remainder of the physical vote-by-mail ballot envelopes are available. None of that. They just produced what they had at that point, flipped through them because, the Team DeFranco volunteers just observe what the state workers are doing behind the table, recounting. And even on a partial set of physical envelopes at the end of the day, Mr. DeFranco still had 3,200 fewer vote-by-mail envelopes than should have been available for that 20% piece that was recounted. he was still able to seek summary judgment, even on an impartial recount. It was still enough for him to win his case. So if you read on,
reading on, he started to manually review and catalog each and every electronic image. So because now the clerk says, "Oh, well, I don't have the physical envelope, but here, we took pictures of all this. We took pictures of all.
Right.
We got it. Go ahead. You can look at the images on the envelopes, and about 70% of the vote by mail envelope images had been partially redacted. That means that portions were deliberately blackened out by the county clerk. Now,
yeah.
When was that done? When did anybody find out when were they blackened out? Were they blackened out at the time that the image was the picture of the envelope was taken? Because that doesn't make sense.
It was a digital redaction.
Oh, it was a digital. So they partially redacted digitally. Now this is ridiculous because if you're doing an official recount and you have that image, there's no reason to redact it because one, you're counting them so quickly, and number two, you're there as to actually physically see. And in some cases, you're matching. You're looking at dates. You're looking at postmarks. I participated in Bob Grogan's recount. You're looking to see that it was signed. All of that, right? So they redacted it. And most of the redactions were so poorly done on the outside of the envelope that the contents were still visible. So because they digitally redacted it, and his team, DeFranco's team, could see that the clerk had attempted to hide blank voter signature fields, blank voter address fields, and blank witness signature fields on the envelopes. So the reason they redacted it is because there was nothing there, and that would not have been a valid ballot. You can't have an unsigned vote by mail envelope and count that ballot inside it as a valid vote, correct?
Right. So we could speculate here. We don't know what happened, but could that be why when the physical count took place, only some of the vote by mail envelopes were provided and others were not readily available? Maybe the redacted ones were readily available. We don't know. But what's interesting is just on the physical recount, Mr. DeFranco still had enough evidence to move for summary judgment and win. And the clerk had to come back and file digital images and say, oh, we magically found all the envelopes now. Here they are. We still win. So they would have lost that motion had they not come up with the images, but they were given digitally on a drive. So it's interesting that that's what it took to get these of all of the outside envelopes, but we still never got to see what those look like with human eyes. Why not produce the real physical envelopes in their entirety? We never.
Yeah, because if they can digitally redact something, can't they just scribble on it as well?
Could have.
I mean, so DeFranco did move to amend his lawsuit, according to your write-up here, and obtain summary judgment based on now a cover-up.
Well, what happened is he still was able to move for summary judgment again after all the digital images of the envelopes were produced, because he could see, based on what they gave him, that some of the vote by mail ballots should not have been counted just from the appearance of the envelopes. But that failed. They weren't able to amend the lawsuit to also allege that
there was a cover-up.
Vote by mail counted that should not have. Because he could have won on that basis potentially, but he wasn't able to make that argument because the court ruled you should have noticed physical recount that some of the envelopes had been completed properly on the outside, which of course was impossible for his team to do on site during that recount because they're just flipping through and counting. There was no meaningful review of each outside of each envelope. So he couldn't have done that, but the judge said you should have known and alleged it initially. Although how could Mr. DeFranco possibly known that the clerk was pulling ballots out of incomplete envelopes and putting them into the overall pool of counted votes? There was no way for him to know.
No, he had no. And additionally, it wasn't until after he had done the physical count of the vote by mail ballots that they did have, that he realized that they were missing a whole thousands of them. And those thousands of them are probably the ones that didn't have any markings on the outside. That's why, that's what I'm suspecting. I don't know. Hey, so it says here that that essentially the Cook County Judge Fallon piled on joining the clerk's opposition against DeFranco with arguments that the election materials are private records. Now, honestly, folks, they're not necessarily that private. I mean, we can find out if you pulled a Republican ballot, a Democrat ballot. We can find out your address. I mean, there's a lot of information that's on voter registration rolls. And while, admittedly, they are not to be used for commercial purposes whatsoever, but they're not necessarily private. And, oh, by the way, when you put on your voter registration, when you include, which is completely optional, you do not have to do it. But since the space is there, I think a lot of people think that they have to fill it in to register to vote. You don't have to fill in your phone number or your email. But if you do, that is, okay, it's not necessarily public available, but it's not private either. It's not really private. Campaigns, candidates, parties can receive that election information whenever they want to. They can go ahead and request it if they have proper authority. Now, they can still, obviously, cannot use it commercially, cannot do that. They absolutely can use it for voter contact. 100%. They absolutely can use the information on those voter rolls to verify who you are. They absolutely can use those voter rolls to, things that we have done, which is run it against the National Change of Address list to see if there's been a move. So that's all fair game. So this is not, the judge is completely wrong. It's not, they're not private records. I'm not going to say that they're fully public because you kind of have to, in Illinois, you have to have authorization. But they're certainly not private.
It's a gray area, with private records law, and these were election materials.
Right.
And there's some question whether election materials would fall under the, category of private records. And also some of these vote by mail ballots, probably some of them were mailed. They were post dated by November 3rd, 2020, but maybe it just took a while them to get to the Cook County Clerk's office to be counted within the following 2 weeks. And if they went through the mail, any markings on the outside of U.S. mail, there's no expectation of privacy for that envelope. And you and I know if there's a ballot challenge, any citizen can challenge someone for, insufficient signatures on their petition of nomination. You can go to the clerk and have a signature examination, and we can see the signatures, whether they match. So there's a lot of gray areas here. And I also find it really interesting that his opponent, who was seated as a Cook County judge, joined the Cook County clerk to argue the privacy of the record. Why is she doing that? I just find that interesting.
That's, you think that she'd be smart enough to just stay out of it. It's just remarkable that she was even allowed to do that. Yep. I don't know. Well, listen, I understand that he is continuing on with his lawsuit to try and get to the bottom of this.
He is. He's appealed to the Illinois Appellate Court. Also a court case pending, but it has been stayed until there is a final outcome in the state law proceedings. And I, who knows, maybe the federal claim, a constitutional claim, might go further in the federal court, but they want, it to be exhausted first in Illinois. But he is not going to drop this. There's just too many questions that need to be answered. And, maybe everything was done properly. That could be the case. We need sunlight on this because I think, voters.
Here's what wasn't done properly that we know for a fact. She counted ballots past November 17th. You cannot do that in accordance with state law. You can't do it.
Right.
So there, that's a problem. Sorry, your clerk screwed up then.
Yeah, and that might be the easiest problem to attack. Judicial Watch a lawsuit a couple weeks ago. You may have seen this in the Cook County Record. There are 3 plaintiffs. Our Congressman Michael Bost from Illinois in the 12th CD, Laura Palestrini, who's on the State Central Committee for the 14th CD, and Susan Sweeney, who was a presidential elector, ran in 2020. They have all filed a suit challenging the constitutionality of continuing to count votes after Election Day, since the U.S. Constitution does say there shall be one election day, yet we continue counting for the tail period. So, we'll see if that lawsuit has any legs, but, that's another lawsuit pending. And, it's a shame we have to litigate to get sunlight on some of these just basic questions. Why can't we see the paper envelope? Why can't we get answers to why these numbers don't add up? All of that would really make a difference and give us a lot more confidence in our elections.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for bringing this to light, Char. You wrote a really good piece. I included it in my newsletter for people who are listening. If you have not signed up for my newsletter, go to breakthrough-ideas.com. It comes out once a week. It's on Sundays, and it's got a lot of different information and a recap of our podcasts. So I encourage you to sign up for that. You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. It's listed on the AM 560 listing of podcasts as well. And so share this information. It's really important that we get elections right. It doesn't endanger anybody, to make sure that the counting is done accurately. Char, I want to thank you for your service to the Republican parties and to the state of Illinois and to taxpayers. Really, you've been a fighter for them more than anything else. That's what we have always aligned ourselves with. You and I is fighting for the taxpayers. Property taxes, something that, by the way, I hear nobody talking about anymore. Why are not people talking about property taxes, the pension crisis? All of this stuff is a problem still in Illinois. Lots of things to happen. And it's only going to happen if we get different people in office with that are willing to take on the policy issues that need to be taken on to make this a once again prosperous state. So, Char, thanks a lot for being on my program, The Real Story. Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. Just a little bit about the economy and how it's performing in the state of Illinois. It's always important to stay ahead of that story and understand exactly what's going on, because there's been a lot of disinformation lately. But reading from Kevin Bessler in the Center Square, he writes, a measure of the Illinois economy dropped significantly in July. And he points to the University of Illinois Flash Index. It uses various metrics, including corporate earnings, tax receipts, and personal income, to measure the level of economic activity around the state. And that Flash Index dropped from 105.5 in June to 104.9 in July. Now, a reading over 100 usually indicates growth in the economy, so it appears that the economy in Illinois is still growing. However, it's growing at less of a rate than it was in June. Reading on in his article from, again, Mr. Bessler, the contradictory economic indicators continue with negative growth in the U.S. GDP the last 2 quarters and slowing growth of Illinois tax receipts, accompanied by still low unemployment rates both nationally and in a state with a high level of inflation. This is from U of I economist Mr. Gertz. He said that in an online post, noting that the index dropped to him significantly. So to the casual reader, moving from 105.5 to 104.9 may not seem significant to us, but according to experts who look at this as an indication of growth, it is an actual significant problem. Gertz also said that individual income tax and sales tax receipts have not kept pace with inflation over the past 3 months, while corporate tax receipts remain strong. So again, a part of the reason that Illinois is in better shape, and I'm not going to say decent, I'm not going to say good, because that's not true, and I'll go over that in a minute, but better shape than prior years is, one, we've had this huge influx of federal money. Number two, we've had enormous amounts of tax receipts that have increased our Sales tax, for example, is based on the value of the goods, and then you add the tax on top of it. So as inflation has, increased the value of the goods, and you're paying more for goods, then you're paying more sales tax on top of those goods. So it just makes sense that they've had increasing tax receipts. However, again, Gertz said that individual income tax and sales tax have not kept pace with inflation, which means that people they're controlling their buying right now, and things are tight. So what else does this mean? Well, Illinois Policy Institute also had a very good article on this. Fact check: Illinois' economic recovery under Pritzker is among the worst in the nation. They just put out this piece yesterday. Again, it's August 3rd when I'm recording this particular podcast. This is a piece from the Illinois Policy Institute on August 2nd. They say J.B. Pritzker's latest campaign ad boasts his economic record, saying he fixed the state finances. The only thing missing is data to back up his claim. They go on. Filmed in Normal, Illinois, the ad credits Pritzker for new jobs and local businesses and claims that he made Normal is becoming normal across Illinois. What he made normal in Normal is becoming normal across Illinois. Well, that's really goofy. But that's not so, they say, according to this article. The Bloomington Normal metro area did recoup 104% of its pandemic job losses, but out of 15 Illinois metropolitan areas, it is the only one to get back all of the jobs it had before the pandemic. It's unlikely Pritzker will film an ad bragging about how he helped Kankakee recover only 38% of the jobs it lost during the pandemic. So they're down. So Bloomington's the only one who has recovered. They're at 104% of their jobs prior to COVID beginning. Carbondale, Marion, interesting. They're only at 95%. They haven't recovered. Springfield at 94%. It goes on and on and on. Illinois statewide, we're only at 86% of the jobs that we had pre-COVID. Chicago, Naperville, Arlington Heights, if you're up here in the suburbs, we're only at 85%. So we're below the statewide average for the number of jobs that we have been recovered since COVID. Rockford down to 74%. Kankakee, they're only at 38%. That is abysmal. That's horrific. The ad would make sense if Pritzker were running for the mayor of Normal, but Illinois as a state has had one of the worst pandemic recoveries in the nation, writes Illinois Policy Institute. If job growth were booming like Pritzker claimed, Illinois wouldn't have the highest unemployment rate in the Midwest and the fifth highest in the nation. And of course, that is something that WirePoints has covered extensively. Ted Dabrowski writing in a WirePoints article back from July 11th. The title, Illinois Economy, Jobs Suffer Under a Potential Presidential Candidate, J.B. Pritzker. Remember, this is back when J.B. Pritzker was going around the nation to, New Hampshire and Washington, D.C. and Florida and meeting with Democratic political groups and, basically getting on the road to 2024, which is outrageous. I mean, this country in no way is going to ever elect somebody like J.B. Pritzker. It's just not going to happen. And the guy's delusional. Anyway, Ted wrote, with rumors heating up about Governor J.B. Pritzker's potential run for president and the federal government's recent release of GDP numbers for the first quarter of 2022, that was down. And then, of course, we know the second quarter was down. Polls today consistently show economic issues as the biggest concern for Americans. Illinois growth and job numbers aren't pretty for Governor Pritzker, so Ted is paralleling the same conversation the Illinois Policy Institute put out, but they have the growth numbers. So Ted put out the growth numbers. Pritzker's Illinois has the slowest GDP growth of all of its neighbors, the slowest. So the highest unemployment in the Midwest, even though we are the behemoth, fifth largest economy in the entire country. And in the Midwest, we outshine all of our neighbors when it comes to having a diversified economy and a large economy that should be able to recover faster because of its diversification and its size. Not happening. It's not happening in Illinois. Pritzker's Illinois, we have the slowest GDP growth of all of our neighbors. We had only growth between Q1 of 2022 and between 2019 Q1 and 2022 Q1, our GDP has only grown 0.5%. Our slimmer, sexier sister, Indiana, 6.1% GDP growth. 6.1% GDP growth, and we're sitting here at 0.5%, less than 1%. Iowa, 5.2% GDP growth in that time frame. Missouri, the show me state, 3.1% GDP growth. Wisconsin to the north, 1.6% GDP growth. So 3 times that of Illinois. And we are the giant in the Midwest. We are the hub of transportation in the Midwest. We're the 5th largest economy in the United States. And we're suffering. So, when Pritzker starts, you start to see his commercials out there. And the Democrats, by the way, not just him, all these other Democrats that want to just say, we're doing great. Not compared to our neighbors. No, we're not. We should be thriving. But our energy policy is upside down. Our policy on education is upside down. Our regulations are upside down. It's much more difficult to, put a business in place in the state of Illinois, and the numbers bear it out. So just a warning to my listeners, when you start seeing those commercials or, things don't seem so bad, there's a whole slew of people that are going to be just fine in this slow growth economy. Maybe they're just insulated from the bad economics of this state, but it is not true for the majority of our fellow residents here. And the only way we're going to turn this around is if we turn around our policies. So thanks a lot for listening to The Real Story this time. Again, just share this podcast with other people and stay tuned. There's more important issues that are going to be brought up over the next few months. Thanks for joining me.